Well, welcome everyone to the Deakin University Art Gallery and to our first exhibition of 2024, an exhibition called Conversations in Space. To formally begin today's artist talk, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which I am speaking today here at the Burwood campus. I pay respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditional custodians, elders and ancestors of all the lands from which you might be joining our gathering, and I express our gratitude for their care of country which continues to sustain us as it has done for millennia. I also acknowledge any First Nations audience members who might be listening and watching today. Education, creativity, culture have ancient heritage on this continent, which we aim to honour and reflect in the different ways we continue to teach and learn here at Deakin University. If we haven't met before, my name's James Lynch and I'm the curator here at the Deakin University Art Gallery. And today we are joined by students of the Masters of Creative Arts. So thank you for joining us, and with lecturers Alona Jetmar and Katie Lee. So thank you in advance for joining the talk today. We're going to talk for 30 to 40 minutes, so there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. For any audience members who might have low vision, I would describe myself as a middle-aged male with short cropped hair, a greying beard, clear reading glasses and blue eyes. I'm wearing a white cotton shirt and grey trousers. And today we're seated amongst the exhibition that I curated called Conversations in Space. And this project came about from a desire to present the recent works of one of NAM's, Melbourne's most senior artists, Helen Maudsley, in a new context with a differing generation of artists. And the purpose of this project was to kind of create some connections and talk across different generations of artists and audiences, and to not see artists working in isolation. So it gives me an enormous sense of pride to present the works of artists Alex Hobba, Helen Maudsley, Noriko Nakamura and Laura Skirl to the Deakin community. And we are very fortunate today to be joined by artists Noriko Nakamura and Laura Skirl. By way of introduction, Noriko is currently based in Castlemaine on the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung. She is an artist who uses stone carving to make installations, drawing on ideas of animism and ritualistic practices. Nakamura first studied at the Byam Shaw School of Art at Central St Martin's College in London, and then followed her undergraduate studies with an honours at the University of Melbourne's Victorian College of the Arts and Music back in 2011. And more recently, Nakamura has completed a Masters of Fine Art at La Trobe University. Recent solo exhibitions include In the Beginning Was Chaos at Composite Yards just last year in 2023, Soil, Water, Stone, Yamanashi in Kofu in Japan, the force that the warrior adopts during the evolution of the pale pink rose, an exhibition at Caves, Melbourne, and selected group exhibitions, including the really fantastic exhibition Maternal Inheritance just last year at La Trobe Arts Institute up in Bendigo, and From the Collection at Gertrude Contemporary. And we're also joined today by Laura Skirl. Laura is an artist and writer based in Melbourne, and she is interested in exploring painting as a relational space with poetic, energetic, and eccentric potential. Born in Geelong, Skirl first studied journalism at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, before completing a Masters in Fine Art by Research at the University of Melbourne's Victorian College of Fine Arts and Music. Recent exhibitions include Private Life at Bruss Projects, Aqualung at Alaska Projects in Sydney, Love in a Better Climate at Fort Delta, and selected exhibitions, group exhibitions include Textile, which was at Caves in 2022, Stray Pages exhibition, these days at Coma in Sydney, and Hyper Hyper at the Michael Reed Gallery in Berlin. Skirl was the recipient of the prestigious Leipzig International Artist Residency in Germany back in 2018. So could everyone join me in warmly welcoming Noriko and Laura? This exhibition attempts to kind of create a dialogue between the artworks in the exhibition, and unfortunately today artists Helen Maudsley and Alex Hobart weren't able to join us, but we're very fortunate to have Laura and Noriko here. So I wondered, as a first question, as a way of beginning, could I ask you guys to self-describe, and also after my formal introductions, is there anything else that you want to tell our audience about yourselves, and how would you describe the way you work as an artist?
Okay.
Do you want to go first, Noriko?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Noriko Nakamura, and thank you for the introduction. So for the low vision person, I have a dark hair tied at the back, dark eyes, and white top, Japanese middle-aged female. And I think your introduction was pretty good. And so like my art practice, I often inspired by like a Japanese Shinto animism. So like if you go to Japan, like there's a lot of shrines, and then like there's like shrines for like worshipping like a mountains or trees or rocks. So the kind of idea that like all the like natural like landscape or like rocks and stone have like life force. So I'm kind of inspired by that.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you.
Hi, my name's Laura, and I am a middle-aged blonde woman. I'm wearing a dark shirt and colourful pants. And yeah, thank you, James, and I think you also introduced my practice really well. I am a painter primarily. I also work in drawing and printmaking, and I do some writing about art and also write poetry. And yeah, I guess I would describe my practice as being, I guess, abstract, but I feel like it kind of does hover between abstraction and representation. And I guess colour is a really important concern for me, and gesture, and a kind of ambiguous content that I'm often also unsure about.
Thank you. There's always, lots of different ways to start a conversation. And living and working in Melbourne, one of the most obvious ways to start a conversation is to talk about the weather. So I wondered, weather is our constant companion in Melbourne, constantly changing, and it's constantly on the forefront of everyone's minds as they go about their days. You both work in quite different ways, but I wondered, what effects, if any, does the weather have on your practice? How do you think about the outside world coming into what you make in the studio, even though you're not directly referencing that in your practices? Thanks, Doreen.
It's a funny question, but it's actually quite a good question for me, because I do stone carving. This is a limestone, and for me, I have a studio in my shed, but I leave the lower door open because when I do like hand tools, like hammer and chisel, and like hand saw, and I use like mask to protect, and earmuff, and I cover myself to protect myself from the dust, like to stop inhaling myself as a dust. So I basically kind of working like almost like outside. So like I often try not to carve much in summer. I get so hot. Like I just like all day. I'm just like hammering, chiseling, and I'm sweaty. So and like my goggle get like mist, like kind of covered all of my sweat, and like I can't breathe much. So like I often do carving in winter, which I can just like I don't, even like middle of winter, I don't need a heater. I just like, because it's so sweaty. So actually like I'm a season, actually like kind of changed the timing for my practice, like what I do. Like, so in the summertime, I sometimes do drawings or editing video or like all focus on the writing. And in my practice, so this is a limestone, and limestone is like a piled up like a dead sea creatures, like compressed by the wave in the bottom of the sea, like over like a million years, or like so. So kind of I try when I use limestone, also try to incorporate the kind of like life force, or like just the dead body of seashells and the or like sea creatures crushed by waves, which also kind of affected by the weather, like storms. So kind of weather, actually, well, like natural force is actually a big part of my practice.
Amazing to get that image of you working in the shed in those hot days. How about for you, Laura?
I think I really liked this question because I guess, like I kind of explained, I feel like my work kind of does move, is sort of always in an in-between space between kind of abstraction and representation. And I guess the weather is something that we really sort of anthropomorphize, and we kind of talk about like weather in relation to moods, and we sort of feel directly changed by the weather. And I guess for me, I've sort of moved away from a more representational practice into a more abstract practice, but I don't really feel like my work is purely abstract. And so I'm kind of always thinking about a kind of tangential content to the work, and it doesn't really have a like concrete form. So it is a bit like the weather, is what I'm trying to get to. It kind of like has an energy or a feeling, and sometimes it has a form of some kind, but it's kind of like metamorphic and changing. So I kind of really liked that. And I often look at things like I recently went through all my old drawings, and I was like sorting through them and trying to see what sort of consistencies had happened over maybe the last 10 years and looking at different forms. And I kind of came up with this list of things. And one of them was clouds. And it's not that they are representations of clouds, but they have this like cloud-like amorphous kind of feeling about them. So yeah, so I guess it kind of is a nice way of me thinking about a changeable content, you know. Yeah.
Well, to get more into the bones of these themes of some of this exhibition, you know, the works of Helen Maudsley form a central stage of this exhibition, and these most recent works are all painted by this artist who's now in her 9th decade. She's a nonagerian artist, and you know, in her most recent works, such as these, especially the one here on the left, she questions visual art's ability to communicate without written words. So I wondered if in your own practices, in your own artworks, has there been a time when your own artworks have kind of failed you, or where they've failed to communicate to an audience? And you know, could you talk about some of these moments and, you know, how they might have failed?
I think for me, communication has two ways. So for like my practice, like communicating to the material through the making is very important. And I try to, when I do, because these are like limestone's organic material, so I try to also bring up this like liveness of the stone. So I do rough sketch before carving, but I don't measure or do right lines on the stone. I just kind of simply start carving, and there's actually like fossils inside the stone, and sometimes I can't carve the way I kind of plan, but I kind of now kind of work around it. So I kind of see the process of intuitive stone carving as like a communication between myself and the stone. And I do hand carving because kind of I like the slowness of the process to kind of have established deeper relationship. Yeah. And the communication with the audience, I kind of try, because I do sculptures, but I kind of see, when I have an exhibition, I kind of see as more installation. So I kind of try to set up the way that kind of beer kind of walk in and try to kind of make a kind of experience like immerse into the sculpture and kind of more like also like sometimes kind of see us kind of walking into the daydream. So like a communication kind of for me is that creating the space and kind of territory for the artwork to kind of speak. Yeah. And the failure parts with the audience, I guess because I can't really tell what our audience is but I'm just hoping that's what's happening with me.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amazing to think about you communicating with the material as much as the sculpture's communicating with an audience. How about for you, Laura? What are some thoughts?
Yeah, I think failure is really important to my work. It's basically all kind of based on failure. As James knows, from knowing me over the years, like I tend to change works really quickly, and that can lead to disastrous consequences of things being taken too far or like they just take a different direction, and you kind of have to let go of the original idea. So I'm quite comfortable now with failure. I don't enjoy it, but I have to accept it. And I also love work that is awkward and a little bit wrong and a little bit off kilter and undone or something. So to me, failure is an interesting attribute of work. And I guess it's also something that drives you. I mean, if you weren't experiencing if I wasn't experiencing this kind of constant sense of failure, which I kind of see as generative, I would have figured it out, and I know I never will. So
amazing. Yeah. So failure's a generative exercise, creating more work, but there's also a vulnerability there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. And yourself, Noriko, as an artist using English as a second language, you would have witnessed perhaps your works kind of connecting with an audience, outside of language, perhaps. Are there any, examples that you can think of?
Okay. So, because I did my master's, and in part of my master's thesis, my research was based on Elizabeth Cross's Chaos Territory Art. So her kind of book about chaos. And in the book, she talked about sensation, and kind of she talked about kind of this artwork kind of holds a sensation, and in my thesis also talk about through the limestone carving, because I do hammer and chisel kind of, and also my mouth is covered, eyes are covered, ears covered. My sensory input is kind of blocked, so I kind of almost felt like this vibration of chiseling is echoing in my body and also kind of transmuting into the sculpture.
Yeah, wow.
So I'm kind of hoping that's kind of conceptually that's how I feel my work, and hoping that a viewer experience this sensation through kind of walking around my works, and that's kind of beyond the I kind of see it's beyond the human language.
Yeah, amazing, like a vibrational energy.
Yeah.
Kind of connecting this questioning a little bit further, the agency and power of art, in Helen's work in particular, when she was working, she really kind of, she's still working, but when she first started working, she critiqued the kind of phallocentric kind of compositions by creating these kind of all over compositions and patterns. And in the wonderful kind of secret artwork around the back is called Nudes from the Deakin University collection. And it's an incredible composition where a number of kind of kitchen chairs are kind of turned over and they create this very complicated, dense maze. So I wondered, when Helen was first making, most of her contemporaries were men and most of her audiences were probably men as well. So I wondered if, this kind of decentralising of compositions, but also, her approach, do you think is still relevant for you working today? And do you think about the way kind of power operates when you're kind of these larger operational kind of questions of power when you're alone in the studio kind of working? Do you want to go first, Laura?
Sure. I think it is really important to think about the power dynamics that exist in the art world and in the world generally. Something I feel really excited about is seeing like a lot more like First Nations curators and changing kind of, like the way, like the usual sort of presentations of certain voices and that becoming a lot more open. And so I think there's like always a long way for that to go. I guess in my own work, I know that I'm working in painting and abstract painting, which I guess kind of will often, puts you into a conversation often with an art history that is written in a way that's dominated by white men, but not that it necessarily was a white male-dominated history. There were so many women working at, throughout history that were making incredible contributions to painting and all art forms. And I guess, if we think of like Hilma af Klint now being thought of as the first abstract painter, then this kind of gets toppled on its head. So I sort of do have that in my mind at all the time. But I also love art history. Like actually when I did the journalism degree, I also did an art history degree. It was like a dual thing. And I really, really enjoy looking at all different artists' work. But I think that something I feel quite interested in is a kind of, and I guess where I feel I kind of would situate myself is this sort of contemporary abstract painting. I don't know it's not really a movement, but it's kind of like a condition. It's often described as like provisionalism or casualism. And when an artist called Sharon Butler wrote about that in 2011, she kind of talked about like artists that were using abstraction and kind of looking to the past, but also they were making quite, like I said, kind of like awkward, off-kilter, undone, unfinished work. And that was sort of their interest, but they were kind of really butting up against the kind of macho-ness of the modernist period. They were kind of using things from it and borrowing quite openly, but they were also, she said, actually referencing like a lot of female artists from the 70s, so people like Reem Morton and Elizabeth Murray and people like that. So that was interesting to me because I'm really drawn to that work and sort of to find out that perspective, that was kind of quite inspiring. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing.
So like for me, we are aware that we still live in a patriarchy society, but for my practice, I kind of, I use like sometimes inspired by like my female body or like body parts, but I kind of see kind of gender these days, not like hard to be put in like a male and a female. So I kind of see kind of gender has been more like gradation. So more for my practice, I like to kind of loosen up kind of more the dualism of two opposite. So like for my practice, I like to, there's also like human nature division. And then kind of some in a Western philosophy, they're like, like the humans kind of are separated from the nature. But through my like stone carving and using natural material, I try to loosen up the dualism itself, and then that's kind of I like to think it's kind of also kind of leading to kind of suggesting in this like a male-female division as well, and that's also kind of.
Totally. Putting forward new alternatives.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that. It was a deep question to kind of address. So as well as the weather, our other major companion, as artists and thinkers and students, is thinking about time. Time is our constant companion. And there's a timelessness, I think, in the artists and artworks in this exhibition. Some of them look very familiar, even though we haven't seen these works before. Because, you know, as artists, you're using existing historical forms. Noriko, your own works already look like fossils, like they've been unearthed from the ground. And Laura, your paintings look like they could have been made at any point over the last 70 years. I wonder how time influences your works. And, you know, you've already been practicing for a decade as artists. You know, what's changed in your practice? And, you know, what have you observed, you know, from the outside world that's changed that affects your practices?
Okay, so for me, the time is obviously the limestone is a like really old existing material, and some of the like it takes like 1,000 million years to dead sea creatures to be a stone. So that's kind of also kind of like I'm kind of thinking about like kind of geological earth time, and also through my practice kind of time I spend with my stone to create the kind of communication part of the time. And for me, because I've been practicing for like over a decade, and after I finish undergrad, I've been practicing as an artist. And like 5 years ago, I had my daughter. I have a baby. So like also as a woman, like kind of I transformed from like kind of uni student into like, kind of practicing artist and becoming mother. And the subject like my more recent subject matter of my artwork is kind of motherhood and becoming mother and a transformation of the body, female body. So the aging, I kind of also interested in the idea of time, like aging body and transformation.
Amazing. Yeah, so that's an ongoing subject for you. Yeah. And that is becoming more apparent as you work and like more of a theme in your works as you kind of go on?
I think so. Yeah. I kind of like at the start of the practice, like the way I started going into the like sculpture was because I like my cat, so I started making a sculpture about my cat. Like so, kind of that also was kind of how I got into the idea of animism and like nature.
Of course, amazing,
so then like I loved towards my daughter kind of also started a new kind of interest in my art. So like every time I grow up, just new things happening. So
I think every art student always makes an artwork about their pets, don't they, as a way to start. What about for you, Laura? Thinking about time and as your companion in the studio. You've touched on it already.
I think so, yeah. I guess it is that there's kind of that connection back to a kind of history of painting that I do feel really interested in and really indebted in that to that kind of conversation and I guess continuing it and rethinking about it. I guess for me, I said I have sort of moved into a more kind of, I've let go of a lot of the representational elements that did exist in my work. And I think other like kind of practical things that keep change, like have been really important for me over the last 10 years one thing I can really think of is like conversations with artist friends. Like I know that this is kind of, but it's something that has happened over that 10 years. And like those incredible conversations that actually do shift your practice quite considerably. And then the relationships that you have with those people. And I don't know, it feels like something that carries you through like your practice. So I know it's kind of to the side, but it feels like very enmeshed in, you know, the journey of it all. Yeah.
So, you know, there are so many more artists, you know, practicing in Melbourne, in Naarm now than even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And so much more art being made as well, and more audience. Yet, you know, what becomes art history is such a narrow, you know, bandwidth of artists and, you know, narratives and practices. So I wondered, you know, what inspires you from the past that we may not know of and why? I mean, you kind of keep answering the questions in advance, Laura. But, you know, and what kind of different art histories inspire you, and have you created connections with different generations of artists? Have you had an opportunity to kind of create connections with different artists of different ages, and has that been something that you've been able to nurture, in a positive way, in your practices?
Should I? Yeah, I guess, I sort of have talked about those connections to art history. As far as in the actual art community, I think an experience like this to show with Helen, that's quite unusual. But I think that the general art community in Melbourne is really open, and you can go, if you have a studio, you probably have a studio next to somebody of a different generation to you, either younger or older. And I love that about the art world. I love that you have friends of all ages, and because that's so wonderful. I really don't feel that sense of separation. So that's really nice. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
What about for you?
Yeah,
Noriko?
it's being artists a great way to meet so many people, artists in a different age. And after I finished undergrad, I joined the board of TCV Art Think. It's Artislan Space, and through being on the board of the gallery Artislan Space, I met so many different even stage of artists. I meet kind of very established artists who wanna show in a non-museum setting.
Yeah.
And some other artists mid-career artists who are on the board who like to support art scene. So it's really good. I wouldn't make any friendship with these people without art.
Otherwise, yeah.
And
But living in Castlemaine, there's artists everywhere.
yeah, so it's great.
Yeah. And do you get to establish relationships in that way up there in
more
Castlemaine?
picnics.
More picnics, right? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I kind of wondered, being in the studio is with an artist working by themselves, it's such a kind of stereotype. But also in the studio, working by yourself, sometimes that's the only way to make work. But there are always other people in the studio, through your imagination and memories, and thinking about the past and how people have influenced you. So I wondered, do you believe in ghosts? And are there ghosts that you feel are in the studio? It directly relates to your work, Noriko, because in Shinto belief, each object has a soul that connects with the past.
Yeah. So.
And how can you make painting without really having ghosts with you?
Yeah. So the ghost, actually, it's weird things to say, but I not often, maybe a few times in my life, I think I've seen ghosts in Japan. It's never happened in Australia.
Wow.
But sometimes I walking with my friend at night, and there's some guy on the street on the ground, and then I just grab my friend and turn the corner because there's some weird dude on the ground, and then my friend's like, what are you talking about?
She did see.
And also sometimes I was working in izakaya, and on a particular hallway, I don't hear with my body, but I can sense some sound, and no one else. And there's one guy I said, that's just a bit weird there. And he was like, this is I can hear someone running there as well.
Amazing.
So that kind of things happens to me, and sometimes it's not that obvious. Sometimes I just feel particular place that I wouldn't walk past. There's a pathway from in Japan, there's a house, the shortest way from the station, I can just walk up, but I have to walk around because there's a particular corner that I don't want to walk past. So, but that kind of experience doesn't happen in Australia, and I actually researched, and Indigenous people in Australia says there's no ghost in Australia.
Oh, really?
It's more like spirits. So my body my body is more connected to the Japanese ghost, or
Of course,
So that the experience of that kind of realm influenced my practice, because that in human society, like this is if the science doesn't prove ghosts, like they don't believe, but actually I think there's a much more something going on in the world.
Well, I think, we have so many kind of senses, and I think there's, there must be different ways of feeling and sensing that aren't registered all the time, in our daily lives or whatever. How about for you, Laura? What do you think of this funny question?
I like this question. I feel like I have had a few experiences with, I'm not sure if it's ghosts or a spiritual force or something in my life, so I definitely am open to this. I think I'm a very superstitious person, so I tend to do things like my grandmother, who was really important to me, I always have her initials, like I have it in my studio on the wall, and just like things like that, like looking after you. I have particular artworks as well, like if we're thinking about like the kind of art ghosts or the painting ghosts, I definitely have kind of like artworks, like, sometimes you go to the art gallery and you find the postcard, and it feels special, and I keep them around almost like they're a bit like guides or something. Yeah, so I do feel
Amazing,
like there's sort of that presence, you're kind of surrounding yourself with your, I don't know, it's not really muses, it does feel kind of like a bit of a community or something, from the past.
Amazing. Thank you for revealing that, being so generous. And I think, being in the studio, you're waiting for voices to arrive, whether they're from within or from elsewhere. So I wonder how we're going for time. Perhaps, now would be a good time if there are any questions from the audience that you might have for Laura and Noriko, or myself even. Should I pick some people? Katie, do you have some thoughts?
No, I was just thinking, I was interested in Laura, like your idea of how abstraction might operate in relationship to that sort of those invisible forces or ghosts or channeling something, because you talked about clouds and things like that. I think I'm always really curious about abstraction and how you make decisions, or that sort of relationship between a critical eye and a deeply intuitive one that just is kind of unfurled. Is that something that operates in the way you practice?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think that that intuitive sense, I think you do really have to nurture it and kind of protect it. And sometimes, like, if you're feeling very stressed or something, sometimes for me, I should avoid the studio, because I can't really connect to that kind of sense of what I should do, because I don't know what I'm making. Like, there's not an outcome, that there is no answer. So that's sort of when I start to kind of go too far, I think. And I have been thinking a lot recently about that idea of trying to not control things so much, and trying to, the painting is its own thing. Like, you're there to kind of put it into the world, but sort of separate yourself a bit more from it. So that's always something I'm trying to work on, because I can try to control it too much.
Yeah. What are the processes that you use? Because I think with the opening you said you work quite fast. Is that right?
Yeah.
So what other things do you do if you're not painting all the time? Do you have other processes of researching and thinking?
Yeah. I do a lot of drawing. Heaps and heaps of drawing. And then when I went to Germany, I was renting a studio from someone, and she was doing a lot of printmaking. So she kind of taught me basic monotype printing techniques. So that was something that I really enjoyed, because I was using oil paint, but I could do it really quickly, and it had the same feeling of drawing. And so I tend to also put thick paint onto the canvas, and then put paper on and peel it off, and kind of then reprint it onto things, so you're getting repetitious marks. And I love writing, I do really enjoy writing. So all of those things kind of combined. And I feel like I'm always trying to make the paintings sort of almost more like the drawings, but they kind of they demand something else of you, you know, like the drawings feel like they stand on their own, and the paintings sort of feel like they want more. I don't know what, yeah.
Surely. Cindy, you've got one, I know.
But this wasn't mentioned earlier, but I was at the same time. But I was interested to know, Marco, what drew you to the material that you work with.
Okay. So I went to undergrad for BCA, and I was actually studying the painting department, and so at that time I was painting a kind of picture of animal, like my cat or like a nature, but I realized it just became too kitschy. So I wanted to work with kind of how amazing my cat is. I started making sculpture, and I collected my cat is, but through painting I didn't achieve as much as.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, so that's kind of like.
But then how did you switch from cat hair to limestone?
So stones like that kind of like then I got, and then also like because the Shinto animism like in like kind of, for example, like spirited away, so like liver,
Yes.
like kohaku liver, and this is like kind of spirit. But so I wanted to work with that kind of force and
okay,
spirits,
wow.
and then
Yeah.
kind of so that I wanted to pick some natural material has been existing a long time. So then the stone is one of the kind of longest existing material in the
Wow.
earth.
Yeah.
And I tried marbles, carving, but it was very hard. So, and then then like limestone is quite softer, so soft. So that's got into the limestone carving.
And you self-taught?
Yes, I did a one-day workshop, but then a lot of the kind of technique is watching on the YouTube. So YouTube's being, so just self-taught. Yeah.
Fantastic. Some other questions? What are some thoughts? Everyone's been listening so well.
So like, it's for the arts, like the whole creative process, right? So how would you like describe it?
Whole creative process. So for me, like, have you ever read like Haruki Murakami's Why Not Bird Chronicle? So it's a novel. So there's a main character going into like a deep well, and he stays there for like duration of time, and he was actually looking for his wife, but that's the way he wanted to find his wife. And he stayed in the bottom of the well for duration of time. And then when he came out, he had like this kind of bruise or like scar in his face, and somehow he got some magical power to heal people. So like for me, creating practices is going down the bottom of the well, and like kind of I'll in my studio in the zone and kind of carve it. So it's kind of going into the kind of deep well and communicate through,
Like an interior space.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great metaphor. What about for you, Laura?
I love that. I really want that to also, because it's like it really does feel like that, doesn't it? And sometimes I think it's also like kind of trying, like there's chaos and you're trying to kind of, I don't mean order it, but I mean like find something in it, you know? I often feel like it's like throwing out a whole lot of stuff and then figuring out what you bring back together to then represent. So yeah, but I love the well metaphor. I think that's, really great.
Fantastic. Thank you for that question. Anyone else? Some other thoughts?
So does the artwork come from the well, or do you take things from the world back into it?
I try to take things that emerged in the well to like back up.
Because I was going to ask you that, Laura, do you think that your abstraction, kind of the channel that you do, comes from being in the world, or comes from the studio process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting because I think, like I was sort of saying earlier, I think that I'm always thinking about how, you know, often in abstract painting, it's kind of talked about in kind of formal way. And I feel like I don't really, like I don't, you know, like I do feel like for me there is some content, but I don't really know what it is, you know, but like the kind of things that I look at a lot are almost like more like phenomena. Like if you think about, like that's why the weather was an interesting thing, because I guess it's like things that are shifting, like they're not so solid. So it's not like I do think it is coming from the world, but it's just that I don't know, I can't really say, because I'm not trying to illustrate something. And so it's almost like maybe you start with something, and I do have all these folders in my studio of like pictures and stuff. You might start with something, but then you kind of, I feel like I have to just like let the painting do the thing. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Some other thoughts, observations? Well, thank you everyone for that incredibly generative discussion. We went to some amazing places. It's nice to have a conversation where you start to understand people's psychology and some of these metaphors that motivate the creative process. Everything comes back to cats and to ghosts and wells. They were really great subjects and themes that kind of help us in our lives to make things and do things and motivate us. So could everyone join me in thanking Laura and Marco? Before we depart, a big thank you to Tabitha for organising today. Tabitha Davies, our Public Programs and Education Officer. Also to Ben and Dean for the video services, and also to Cindy Seeberger, who helped organise today as well. Thank you. And thanks guys for joining us. I'm going to join you guys again soon outside and have a discussion too. So thanks again, everyone.